But these psychological and moral principles make a difference. They make a difference in how we see one another, how we experience one another. So that was the story that you're referring to. When I saw all people needed was some leadership, all people needed was a little bit of a history lesson. All
Right.
people needed to do was to be reminded of some moral principle and to be reminded of the fact that even when you mention these huge numbers, it's over 20 years and it would be less than we spend every year on defense. Somebody just laid out the truth, and that is how the liars got into power.
Mhm.
Because those who supposedly believe in the truth haven't been willing to stand by the truth, have been incremental with the truth, have been willing to compromise with the truth, and I'm talking about the Democratic Party.
Yeah. Yes. uh, how much of a role does the media play? Because obviously, there's half the country has a lot of compassion for other people, but we don't hear, even over the last 2 weeks, the whole month of January, but especially the last 2 weeks, which have been, so hard for so much of the country. And we just don't hear leadership voices or compassionate voices, or just someone saying, I mean, of course there's been some leaders that have said this is wrong, but we don't hear it with the same magnitude. And do you
Well,
think it's the media, or what do you think, or the party itself?
well, I've talked about what I call the political media industrial complex. So what the media has not been, legacy media has not been independent. So what I saw, for instance, when I ran for president in 2024, is that MSNBC, CNN, and also The View was big on this. They were willing to be mouthpieces for the talking points of the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party at that time, at the highest levels of the DNC, there had been a decision made that we would go with Joe Biden. No one else, that anybody else was a spoiler, which makes no sense because you're running in a Democratic primary, creating narratives such as we don't primary a sitting president when this is historically not true, and so forth. And the media went along. For instance, in 24, unlike 20, I was blacklisted basically on CNN and MSNBC. Now, another thing that I'll mention is something that you mentioned before, the laziness of the media, of the corporate media, and a lot of the independent media as well, by the way. So you were mentioning before how it's not that difficult to do your own research and see what my past actually was. But these people it's so sloppy, and it is so corrupt, and it is so unethical. Call me a crystal lady.
I know.
Make me a joke, and then just repeat it again, and just repeat it again, and just repeat it again. And then also how, I grew up a Democrat. We used to be the free thinking people. Why are you just believing that? Why are you just buying it? One woman came up to me, a very powerful woman in a major American city, when I was running for DNC chair. And she came up to me, and I had just given a talk, a short 2-minute talk at the Interfaith Council. And she looked at me almost stricken. And she said, I just want to tell you. And she seemed like she said, I'm your fan. I just heard you, and I want you to know I'm your fan. And before, I wasn't your fan. And now that I've heard you, I am. And she said, I want you to know I am already pledged to a certain candidate who was running. And I looked at her, I said, thank you. The one thing I would ask is the next time you hear a woman trivialized, mocked, the way I was, that you will not be so quick to buy. She said, I know. I said, and another woman, she said, I get it. Because I had as much of that stuff from Mean Girls as from the boys.
Right.
So when you say, what does the media play? Unfortunately, with social media, the media is not just legacy media. It's also social media. And people who, Adrian, like to think of themselves as too smart to be vulnerable to that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's also there's a term often used in AA, contempt prior to investigation. People who will just see something, a line, or
Yeah. Were you saying that you were blacklisted the first time you ran, or this time?
No. In 2020, I feel, as a minor candidate, certainly I was a minor candidate, I feel I was given appropriate and fair coverage by the media. I was on MSNBC, I was on CNN, not a lot, but I think in proportion to, I also had a CNN town hall. What they did this time, all the Republicans had town halls, even people who were much lower than I was in the polls at the time, Chris Christie and so forth, Vivek Ramaswamy. But absolutely not. They were towing the line on the Democratic side. It had been decided. Now, the traditional role of the political party is not that they get to decide who the nominee is. The people, the voters are supposed to decide who the nominee should be. But they went along of the total de-amplification of anyone who was not one of them. And like I said, not just de-amplification, but vilification, such as, Sonny Hostin on The View, or people like that.
Yeah. Before we came on officially, I was mentioning that I saw you speak in 2023 at Hillside International Truth Center in Atlanta. And I was so moved. I was really in tears, honestly. And I felt like you were weary, and that the people and the leaders who were there were booing you. In fact, there was a little circle surrounding you, up front, and everyone was praying and, just giving you love. And it was very powerful. And I'm bringing this up to say that I get so amazed by you and how you keep going. And I'm grateful. And I know that a lot of people tell you how grateful they are. I see it in comments, on your videos. So I'm very grateful that you are who you are. And I'm wondering, my question is, how do you keep going? And what have you learned about yourself since the first time you ran to now?
In the Course in Miracles, it says, you must take 100% responsibility for your experience. And if you don't, you will pay a very high price. And the very high price you will pay is that you will not be able to change it. So I definitely see things that I naively either did or failed to do that made it easier for people to form ammunition of sorts against me. I think the main thing I learned, however, is I'm still here. I think my spiritual challenge has been not to harden. My spiritual challenge has been not to become bitter. That's not the way I want to age, as an old, angry, pathetic old woman. That's not what I want to be. I also feel, if you have any knowledge of history, that those who stood for what they believed in their hearts was goodness and truth, did not always have an easy time. There were always forces of resistance in this country to the true furtherance of the democratic franchise, the ideal that everyone should have a chance to soar. There have always been those who, for their own political and economic purposes, would do everything in their power, and usually they're the ones who have more power, to block the fuller actualization of those principles. They have never ultimately prevailed. Abolitionists ultimately prevailed. Women's suffragists ultimately prevailed. Early labor ultimately prevailed. Civil rights ultimately prevailed. I believe that you and I are now living at a time when we are confronted and challenged by forces, in this case, techno-authoritarianism, every bit as vicious in their intent to basically destroy the possibilities of American democracy as ever before. So at this point, it's not even a matter of any of us, well, how is it for you? And I think this is about American, I want to say something here that I haven't said publicly, but I've been thinking about a lot.